bread. All right. Well, let me try that again with my actual um, headset on. Hey, everybody. Welcome back. Second stream of the year. Clearly showing that I'm a little rough still. But I figured I would continue to build off of last week's stream where I was talking about um, sort of how to do a savage sword and sorcery Conan-esque type of a campaign, which I am currently building and working on and ready to run starting next Monday. Not next Monday, but the Monday after, the 22nd. But yeah, so yeah, hopefully I'm coming through okay. Audio not messed up or anything. Just a moment here. Yeah, all right, cool. But anyways, so decided to do this stream on designing adventures and how to set up kind of the core adventure mechanic of um, these sorts of games. If you're not familiar with the genre, though, I feel like most of my subscribers and viewers are, sword and sorcery, especially in sort of the savage sword kind of Conan way, are defined by sort of a low magic. Well, I don't like to call it low magic. I will call it infrequent or rare magic because the magic that is in those worlds, and I'll point that out here, is pretty powerful. So it's not really low magic. When you do encounter it, it can be pretty mighty. But we'll call it low magic overall. I think that's what people often consider low magic. It's a low magic setting, um, often with sort of a light fantasy bent. You do have fantastic elements. It is in a fantastic world, though it doesn't have to be. You could certainly do this in sort of a historical or pseudo-historical type of a setting, but you, uh, but your world is going to not be populated by a bunch of demihumans and monsters all over the place and the like. Um, and so that's kind of the core, but also the feel and the texture is very much a specific thing. If you know, you know. If you don't, you don't, and it's kind of hard to define. Um, it's a pulpier feel of fantasy. It's definitely uh, a good combination of um, thought, thoughtful heroes, but also bold and brash heroes. Conan himself, who's the archetypical character for this type of a setting, uh, is every bit a keen mind as he is a able-bodied swordsman. Sometimes better at thinking through things than fighting through things. We often think of Conan as this invulnerable, juggernaut of a warrior who plows through everything. But if you look at the books and sort of the expanded universe throughout the comics and the like, Conan is very frequently um, beaten down, left for dead, imprisoned. Many of the stories start with him in prison. So clearly he's not infallible. He's tricked, he's fooled, but he's not a fool. Usually when he is tricked, it is when either he has succumbed to some sort of problem or an environmental effect, or he's caught at the wrong opportunity because he likes to drink, and so maybe when he's drunk, he's not able to defend himself. Kind of going a bit off point, but yeah. So your heroes are thoughtful, bold, and brash at the same time. The world is often full of twists and turns and dark secrets and layers of history and lore that are all waiting to be discovered by the characters, by the heroes in the stories. And so you have this weird juxtaposition of what can be a very flat seeming sort of a world where all you seem to ever run into on a regular basis are other people and maybe wild animals, but at the same time there's all this stuff out there that's waiting to be discovered, waiting to be uncovered, and to reward our heroes. But I'll get into that as well when I go through. Now I have created sort of a list slide, my little short notes for this. when I was kind of coalescing my thoughts, and I'm gonna go ahead and pull it up on here on the screen as I do this, so you guys can follow along. I'm gonna turn it into a PDF. I don't know if I'll post it somewhere, but if you want to have it as kind of a checklist or a set of notes, I don't know how useful it is to other folks, but I myself, this is kind of where my thoughts go when I'm designing adventures. Um, I'll go ahead and go through this process or my thoughts on the designing the adventures, and then as we go along, I'll answer questions as they come through or as I see them, and also kind of address sort of maybe a little bit more in depth my angles for um, any of these points that I don't go into as I'm going along. Because I'm not just going to bullet point this. I kind of want to talk about each of these points as we go through. Morning, Brian. Morning, Mar Hawkman. Not sure if Mar Hawkman's still around here because he commented at 8:12 p.m. last night. So I don't know if he's here. We got 3 people watching. This is, but hey, let me go ahead and pull this up and we'll get going. Let's see. All right. So you can see here, Savage Sword notes and adventure notes. All right. So cool. What we have here is I'm going to start with monsters because it's really the big one that comes to mind with a lot of folks who are um, designing these adventures. What do I do with my monsters? What do I have as monsters? The key thing is, so the primary thing that I always find interesting when I'm looking through the Savage Sword comics, which I really am a fan of. I prefer the Savage Sword of Conan comics as opposed to like the old colored Marvel ones. Um, they tend to be a little grittier. um, hey, Cody. Um, and but also in the books. So first of all, monsters are used with purpose. That means, generally speaking, if a monster is in your adventure, they are there for a reason, um, and they are very often the focus of that adventure, or at least the primary menace in that adventure. Next bullet has, they're there to tell a story, or sometimes to shock and amaze. So, like I said, they're the focus of the adventure, but sometimes they come out of nowhere. I wouldn't say there is much as a random encounter, though you could use random encounter tables to this effect. But this would be, for example, Conan is on his way, and I'm going to reference Conan a lot because that's my primary experience with the genre, and it's sort of my primary reference point. But Conan's on his way to a set of lost ruins. They're traveling down a river. Uh, Suddenly, giant prehistoric river monster dinosaur pops up and attacks the boat, or a massive crocodile, or giant snake, or something. Um, it's not just bandits or wolves. Those can come up too, but it is out of nowhere, and it's along the way, and it's sort of there to shock and amaze the players. Oh my God, there's a giant dinosaur, it's going to eat us all. There's a fight that ensues, or a chase, or a flee, run away, and then we continue on with the rest of the adventure. um Monsters are frequently unique. That's the other thing. Yeah, unique monsters are definitely the go-to. If you have a true monster in this setting, that monster is one of a kind. If you have a lich, it's probably the only lich. I mean, I feel like a lich is actually a good monster to put into a Conan, setting. Uh, Not necessarily the same power level as a lich in D&D, because we'll get to that later. Conan, Dark Sword and Sorcery kind of campaigns, the players are a little underarmed, under-equipped to deal with a lich. Unless you, as the DM, put in something to that effect of allowing there to be a trick that the players can learn ahead of time, or on the fly, to defeat that lich or that powerful creature. They also they tend to be used to reinforce the themes of the setting. So, if, for example, you have a setting that is very much about this ancient Lovecraftian past to your world, your monsters are likely going to tap into that a lot. They're going to uh, be lesser entities, old gods, things like that. The monsters, when you do encounter them, will kind of dovetail back into the themes of the setting, into that setting. So deep ones, or Shub-Nigroth style, satyrs or things like that. Doesn't mean you have to tie back into just a single theme, and that all monsters have to tie back into that. But they do tend to reinforce that theme. Many of the monsters that Conan encounters, for example, are things like undead, or subhuman or degenerate races, ancient peoples that are still hidden away, like the snake people, things like that. Um, and so, but all of those reinforce those elements of the layers of history and the time that has passed in Hyboria, um, and they kind of fold back on that. I mentioned this earlier. Most of your enemies are people. Cruel and wicked men are common. So these settings are usually full of schemers, double dealers, bandits, thieves, thugs, slavers, all kinds of ill men and women who want to do you wrong as the hero. There are good folk in the world. They usually are there to uh, create an opportunity for the hero to experience the tragedy of the world. Conan is very famous for falling for beautiful women who end up dying, or ending up being a pawn used to manipulate him, or who betray him. So these are you're going to very often, most often, be dealing with people. Um, Even if you're sent on an adventure to explore an ancient ruin, it's probably at the behest of a lord, um, a king, a fair damsel, um, a piece of lore that tracks back to somebody else wanting you to do that for their own gains. Hey, Dirty History and Hobbies, and Hungar, welcome. It's appropriate that Hungar, the Starvarian, is here. I believe that he is quite a mighty badass sword and sorcery, barbarian of himself. He's a Starvarian. Dirty Hobby and History and Hobbies, DHH, I guess we can call it. Low magic, summoning magical energies and binding them to prepared objects is my favorite magic system. Yes, that's why I adopted the mage for my campaign. I'm using OSE Advanced, uh, and so there is a class in Carcass Crawler that is the mage. That is a very good stand-in for all the frequently encountered spellcasters in a sword and sorcery style. I feel it's appropriate for the character level ones. There are always going to be actual magic users in sword and sorcery settings. They're out there, but they're rare and generally going best used as NPCs. But if you want a low level magic character along the way for the ride in the party, the mage character class in Carcass Crawler, I believe it's number one. Maybe I'm wrong. Carcass Crawler number one um, is perfect. He has no spell casting ability. He can only cast from scrolls, but he can do magical research and write scrolls and stuff. Um, he does have some lesser magical effects that he can do, like light, or um, he can rally or repel enemies. He can open doors, things like that. But these are all done in a die roll skill-based system, similar to that of like a thief. So they become very unpredictable and very low magic, much akin to the class is written to reflect kind of more how Gandalf comes across in the stories. But I feel it's also a great representation of, say, like Mako, the wizard who we see in Conan the Barbarian, where he can do things like open a door or light a torch, things like that. Um, the but he also has the ability to research magic and understand magic. So in the course of a game, he's going to be your guy who can read the ancient texts, maybe can find a way to do the ritual that brings the a dead character back to life. One other advantage of the mage in OSE is that his staff counts as a non-mundane weapon. It counts as magical for striking creatures that require magical weapons, which are going to be rare and should be rare in Conan, but are not unknown. Um, Even in the stories, they talk about rare creatures who no mundane weapon can harm. So yeah, but the mage is a really good stand-in for that. Um, a bit of an aside. Um, Yeah, low magic games are cool. Are cool. They're just not very popular. A lot of people still don't want to play them because they are afraid they don't. It's because they're afraid that they're going to play in a low magic game, but the DM is not going to run the world as a low magic world. So they're going to be facing a lot of monsters and stuff that they can't stand a chance of fighting. Um, yeah. Um, let's see. Yeah, I would say if you're using low magic, if you have like a mage type character and he finds the the you know scrolls of Skelos or whatever, and he's able to read them and learn dark secrets, then he should do that. But I also feel like in a game like that, in settings like this, um, the ritual magic should be very involved and specific, not this generic kind of ritual magic takes X amount of extra time. A ritual should be a ritual, and the players and the DM should expect that they're going to have to go through some sort of gathering of things in ordeal to make it happen. Yeah, I don't agree. So it's interesting with the mage, and we'll continue back to adventure design with the mage. There's a counterpoint to that for divine stuff. The acolyte was written into as a class as an alternative to a cleric in the similar fashion to the mage. I don't feel it is all that useful for um, this sort of a campaign. The acolyte is still too much a cleric. He gets to where he's a heavy armored fighter. He gets to turn undead. Um, he has greater healing ability. The mage does have some minor healing ability, like enough to keep somebody alive and maybe over a few days heal them up a bit because he can do once a day, like 1 hit point per level. Um, but at the same time, that also allows him to function as a tribal shaman or a lesser priest or some hedge wizard. The acolyte still feels a little too clericy to me, even though he's very much written along the same style as the mage. Morning, Daniel. Let's see. All right, so I'm going to start starring stuff, and then I'll go on. So, where was I? Most enemies are people. Yeah, so you're going to be fighting a lot of people. So, if you're going to be in a campaign like this, you have to kind of accept and buy into the fact that a lot of time you're going to be trading blows and crossing blades with all number of bad guys and neutral guys. Morning, Cal. Um, City guards, bandits, thugs, the minions of of a priesthood, other adventurers. Hey, Curtis, welcome, welcome. I am doing well, thank you. All right, going on, continuing. So, demihumans and humanoid monsters are extremely rare to the point of being almost non-existent. Now, in Conan's world, we have snake people. We have lots of subhuman folks who come across very much like humanoids and monsters. Like the Picts, for example, are often depicted pretty much like orcs. The Picts are actually kind of the orcs of Conan's world. Um, so you can kind of reskin and work them in. But if you do run into demi-humans, they're usually going to be something rare, uh, magical, to be feared. For example, you could put elves into your game, and I'm considering even having something like elves in my game, but they should be spooky woodland folk who are probably just as eldritch and nasty as anything else you're going to run into. Maybe not necessarily evil, but definitely alien in their own right. Uh, for that matter, though, if you do want to add a little bit of flavor into your games, and of course, kind of going back into playing characters, you can reskin um, Demihumans to be other things. In my By the Sword campaign that I'm going to be running and streaming, um, I put the Gargantua and the Feral Halfling. The Gargantua was from Carcass Crawler, and it's a reskin of the 5e Goliath. I put them in and reskinned them as humans who carry troll or giant blood, because that's sort of a Norsey, Celtic-y sort of a vibe that I like, and I feel doesn't break the setting. The Feral Halfling is from the BX Character Builder supplement, which is a great book if you haven't checked it out. It's a system for building BX style classes, and it breaks down the actual math that was kind of used or back engineered out of the original classes. But they have a Feral Halfling in there, which I reskinned to a race of small, diminutive humans that live in an isolated part of the world called the Irdri. Um, and so they are still men, they're still humans, but they sort of fill a niche like demi-humans, and they add a little bit more flexibility and versatility and creative. Nobody's made one yet. Everybody's still content with human characters, but that's because I've offered a wide variety of classes for them to draw from besides just fighter. Maybe I'll talk more to that on another stream. All right. Most frequently, your monsters are going to be mundane animals, giant animals, prehistoric life, both mammal and dinosaur style, or undead giants, and lots of apes. Um, Conan runs into so many apes. It's like one of the gods of Hyboria was Jane Goodall or something. I don't know. But yeah, so wolves, wild dogs, bears, crocodiles, snakes, so many snakes, uh, bats, birds, normal animals, and then giant animals, huge boars, giant snakes, you know, uh, massive crocodiles, and you could carry that over into other creatures that don't necessarily appear in any of the books. I feel like a giant beetle or a giant insect of some sort would be right at home in a Conan type setting. Um, of course, we're talking about making your own setting and not necessarily just playing Hyboria, so you get to play with those sliders a little bit and put in what you want. Let's see. Let's see. And so prehistoric life is pretty common. It's not infrequent to have the people in Conan stories encountering something like a dinosaur and screaming dragon. Um, even though there are races of dragons, it's kind of subtextually implied that all the dinosaurs are the remnants of ancient dragons. Undead are not uncommon in Conan stories, to the point where they have even appeared in entire armies. You can have them appear out of nowhere too. I feel like undead are one of those things that you can use sort of to shock and amaze. Going back to an earlier point, the party has to camp to escape the elements. They have to shelter in an old ruin, and as they're sleeping, the rattling of bones can be heard as the dead rise to punish the living for intruding on their slumber. Um, Cursed places are frequently going to have undead. Magical places are frequently going to have undead. Undead might actually be summoned, and used by some of the casters, the more capable casters in your world. A couple instances in Savage Sword where there have been tribal shamans who have raised the dead to serve them. Certainly, undead have a lot of good places. Giants are frequent in there, and within giants, I would say anything of a giant-like nature. If you wanted to throw trolls in or ogres, things like that. Even a two-headed giant like an Etten would certainly not be out of place. Cyclops. I mean, really, they're all just giant bags of hit points, anyways. However, you can always mix it up. For example, you could have an undead giant. There is an instance in a book that has in one of the published stories that has an undead giant. You could have an undead giant. You could have a Cyclops who was unique and evil and has like magic rays that he fires from his eyes. You wouldn't want to have him all the time, and that's probably going to be the special Cyclops for that adventure, but he would work. Um, and again, lots of apes in all flavors, shapes, and sizes. Hordes of apes, giant gorilla apes, flying apes, man apes, apes who walk about the city in robes and do stuff. Apes, lots of apes, apes. Uh, yeah, I would say the Catoblepas, hydras, they work good for big monsters, and certainly that's the sort of monster that you could put in as the focus of an adventure. I would not have them be common. Um, I would say if you're going to put a Catoblepas in there, it's going to be a Catoblepas, the Catoblepas. Um, um, and your Hydra is probably going to be the Hydra. Um, but given the general power level and lack of magic assistance that heroes have, it's yeah. I mean, you definitely don't want to go too overboard. The other thing I forgot to put on this bullet point list is demons. Demons of varying levels are also pretty common in Conan. They're usually summoned and used as minions. Um, Sometimes they're NPCs. Um, where you might have, there's a merchant in the city that everybody thinks is just a crafty merchant, but he's actually a demon, um, or some elder race or whatever. Unique monsters are often powerful, ancient, intelligent, and otherworldly. So yes, the other thing too is like if you, for example, have your Cyclops with his laser beam eye, like I was mentioning earlier, maybe that Cyclops for all intents and purposes appearing like a Cyclops, but maybe he's some sort of elder being or a remnant of an ancient society, or been around long enough to know things. Um, you know, your creatures are powerful to the point where very frequently um, they are unbeatable in a straight up conflict and have to be defeated through trickery and guile and quick thinking and accumulation of lore, or something to that effect. You know the aforementioned Cyclops might be just too tough to beat in a fight. It might come down to the players having and the characters having to find a way to drop the cave on him to get him to beat him, and he might not be dead. He just might be imprisoned for 1,000 years. A lot of the monsters I've seen run into in games, in the stories, are defeated also by being able to wear them out. Um, a lot of them are ancient and in this world, but just barely, and so are uh, kind of holding on by a thread and unstable. And should the players, the characters in the stories, be able to hold their own long enough, the creature will just wear itself out. There is one story in a Savage Sword of Conan where a creature is released. It's a big giant ooze monster. It starts consuming everything around it, filling up the citadel ruin that it's in. Conan and his girl de jour, flee from the tower and out and into the valley that's below the rocky precipice that it rests on, only to watch the creature hit critical mass and explode into a mushroom cloud. I mean, it is described in there as basically through narrative text essentially a nuclear explosion, to the point where the evildoer who had sort of set the things in motion, Conan, you must help me find this ancient treasure, um, ends up not blind, but with the image of the mushroom cloud permanently burned into his eye, so where that's all he sees for the rest of his life, and so he's cursed with that. Uh, but that monster could not be defeated in combat. It took quick action and smart decisions on Conan's part, run away, to deal with it. Um, yeah, let's see. So that covers monsters. I'm going to cover some of the starred comments here on monsters, and then we'll move on to magic. Um, let's see. Iron golems are good level 10 monster. Harry has and shit. Yeah, golems are in there. Constructs in general are another good one. I wasn't gonna bullet point and list every single monster, but constructs are a good one too. Um, there are lots of pieces of art and comics and stories where there is a construct of some sort. The Devil in Iron comes to mind. That's a good one. It's kind of interesting. This basically this construct gets woken up by a lightning blast that strikes it and wakes it from its slumber, and it goes about reconstructing the ruin of the civilization that built it. It's pretty cool. Let's see, and let's see for sure. Great point. The creature generally is the adventure rather than just another foe to defeat along the way, that does bring up. And I'll talk about this. I have a segment coming up on adventure design, on the actual designing the adventures. But yeah, it's a good point, a strong point. Let's see. Frankenstein. Yeah, I mean, sort of. Yeah, I mean, I believe the Devil in Iron was probably playing off of a bit of Frankenstein and a bit of the Golem. Um, let's see. So, all right, cool. Now, moving on. Magic. Kind of already mentioned a bit of this, but magic is rare and wondrous, dangerous, forbidden knowledge that few possess to any effect. It's and it should be read tied, not died, but maybe it's a Freudian slip. Tied to powers, dark powers, and ancient gods. It's unpredictable and uncontrollable, and extremely rare, but often very powerful. Magic, at the worst of times, is almost an auto kill to get involved with in these kinds of stories. And at the best of times, it is a snake ready to bite the hand that's holding it at any given time. Magic in these sorts of settings is often looked on with mistrust, misunderstanding, fear, um, tie-dyed to dark powers. Um, and should be run that way in your games. So, and this requires a bit of buy-in. So in D&D, generally in like default D&D, you don't see a lot of people spending a lot of time with their characters going, "Oh no, it's a magic sword. I shouldn't trust it." Um, but in this sort of a setting, if you're going through a dungeon and you find an ancient sword laying on a table that looks like it has not been touched by time, first of all, there's very likely a legend about that. But also, there's a good chance that picking up that sword is going to be good for you until it isn't. Um, One of the comics I was reading recently has a story called "The Sword of Skelos," and uh, evil sorcerer enchants this sword, and uses an enchantment he finds in the scrolls of Skelos, I believe it is. And this sword is now effectively a heart-seeking dancing blade. Um, it he can wield it, and all he has to do is tell it to kill somebody, and it flies out of his hand and hits their heart, runs them through every time. So that's a great weapon. If a player were to get a hold of that, it's going to be bad. However, that player best be careful, because eventually he's going to threaten somebody without the intention of killing them, and the blade is going to kill them. And so there's the double-edged sword. If you're in the, you're arguing with a nobleman, you're like, "Oh, you horrible man, I'm gonna kill you," and your blade flies out and stabs the king of the realm in the chest and kills him. You're fucked. your your heroes are screwed. But that's keeping in touch with the the sort of the dark double-edged sword. Conan the Barbarian, when Mako brings back Conan, he makes a very good point of saying, I can do this, but there's a cost, there's a price. Not only is there a cost or a price, but even the process itself is not a shoe. Valeria has to sit there and fight off the spirits that are trying to take Conan while this resurrection is occurring. And ultimately, she pays the price by offering up her life. So even if you find beneficial magic like healing and stuff, there may be a cost. If you can find somebody who can cast it, or an item that can do it, uh, you know, there's usually a price. You might find a fountain and it heals you once, but if you drink it again, you crumble to dust. You turn to stone. These sort of things are magic. Is very rarely what it says on the tin. It's a very poorly regulated industry, and you should never trust the label. Um, let's see. All right. Let's see. A couple of points here. Uh, the Warlock class goes back further than 5e, but I would say if you are playing 5e or a 5e variant and you want to have limited magic in your setting, um, limiting it to the Warlock is not a bad way to go. Though I would say get rid of cantrips, or have it to where cantrips require spell slots. Um, because cantrips make warlocks spam monkeys who can throw Eldritch Blast left and right. But the theming of the warlock is actually really good for a low magic setting, because their powers are coming specifically from somewhere with a pact or a deal that they made with something. All right. How do you like the idea of giving monsters a sort of timer before they run away and flee the party? So in old school editions, this is covered by morale. And so I feel like morale is a good tool to have in these games, in this style of play, because monsters are not necessarily stupid. And there are several occurrences within the text and the comics and the like where Conan is able to turn the tide of battle by causing the enemy to flee. That said, there are plenty of monsters who are not going to. I do not really like artificial timers unless it is built into the monster specifically, and specifically for that monster, and in a way that fits the world. A good example would be a creature, an ancient demon or god is freed from an object. He must do X within Y amount of time, or else he cannot gain a foothold in this world. So maybe he's got to possess a hero, drain enough life, complete an incantation, something to that effect, to bind himself to the world. If he doesn't, then he's gone. But you want to also make sure that that timer is predetermined and set, and not some sort of weird random thing, because with a random thing, you could end up, oh look, it was only one turn and the horrible monster's gone. You could have it tied to their powers. Every time they use their mighty fire breath, that elemental creature loses, its hold on the world and becomes less stable until finally the players can keep juking and dodging long enough that fire creature eventually burns itself out. So timers, in a way, yes, but I would say make sure that they're tied to the monster thematically and that they have some sort of actual mechanic tied to them rather than just sort of a random timer. Um, but yes, I think that's doable and usable. Yeah, morale for monsters is a great thing. I mean, morale is uh, morale is important to have if you want a game where killing everything is not the only way that you do it. And so, yes, so if you want players to fight to turn the tide, or fight to a standstill, or to when they have to fight, then morale is important. Yeah, I mean, this is a great example. Um, you know, there might be a pool that resurrects, but every time it does, you come back with a lesser stat. Um, and you could tie this to any stat. Sure, Constitution or Strength is a good one. Every time you dip into the well, you lose some of your health, your overall vitality. But maybe that pool makes you less human every time you go into it, and so you lose a point of charisma every time you actually go into this pool, and are healed again, until eventually that final time you have, when you hit 0 charisma, you can even write in there, once that charisma stat drops to 0, you are more beast than man and become an NPC. Uh, it's gonna really become risk reward, and I think that's really the a key element when you're dealing with magic in this kind of a setting, is that risk reward really needs to be steep. Um, you might have herbalist healers who can revive a character or save them from death, give them 1 or 2 hit points back, but you're not going to have paladins and clerics frequently laying on hands. And if those people exist, they're often dark, dangerous, and should not be trusted, even if they're a priest or a cleric. Um, yeah, I mean, it's funny is there's this feedback loop. Video games started by borrowing, you know, RPG and tabletop mechanics, and then RPG and other tabletop games borrowed from video games, and it circle of life. Hey, Mages Musings, welcome. Um, I was watching the Dungeon Ministers last episode where you have I guess a guest appearance for voice. Um, yes, I dare, sir. I dare. All right, moving along. Adventure construction. So when constructing adventures, they take place in real places, um, ruins, cities, caves, in the wild. Very rarely are you going to have an inexplicable dungeon without some sort of an origin. Um, it is, if you do run into a weird dungeon, it's the construct of a wizard, or made with a purpose still, a labyrinth, or some sanity turning place where a creature is kept, or whatever. But most often you're going to be running around in ancient ruins, whether that's ruined cities, ruined temples. Um, uh, Urban adventures are pretty damn common in this kind of a setting. Uh, Caverns, caves, in the jungle itself. Um, but yeah, places that make sense usually are where these things take place. Wilderness adventures also play heavily. Man versus wild is a constant theme. Conan is always either freezing, or his men are dying of illness, or wasting away in the jungle as they're getting picked off one at a time by this and that. And so this kind of doubles back to what I was saying about monsters. You can use random encounters pretty heavily where they make sense. When going through a jungle slog, for example, in one comic, uh, there's a guy gets bit by a snake. There's another guy who gets eaten by a crocodile. Uh, there's another guy who I believe gets poisoned or falls in or something like. Basically, in the course of going through this slog to get to these ruins, Conan and his band lose like 3 or 4 guys. So yeah, I mean, wilderness adventures are when you're in the wilds in the game. Uh, good opportunity to ramp up those random encounters. Going through the frozen north, wolves, always wolves. Unless it's a giant snow ape, because apes, um, or a giant serpent with fur. Although that was a focus monster, the white worm, the frost worm. Um, keep your dungeons small and or narrate the crawl. So dungeons in Conan are frequently empty, very empty places, very until something happens, and so unless your players are cool with that and are okay walking through a lot of empty spaces and having you describe ruins and emptiness a lot, um, you can kind of glance over that. You can kind of narrate, after you wander around for a while, kind of describe in general. Um, but yeah, there's a lot of empty space in a lot of those places because again, we're not talking about spaces that are full of kobolds and orcs and sturges and slimes and rot grubs and things like that. Um, you can, if you're not going to be cool narrating travel, or your players aren't cool with empty space in dungeons, which is okay. In my opinion, I feel like if you can get your players to accept the empty spaces, that it makes it less likely that they're going to be able to predict when an encounter is going to happen, because empty space, empty space, empty space. And remember, shock and amaze, and specifically used monsters. Um, you can fill some of that empty space, and I'll go into that in a bit here, with other things. But also, encounters, as I said, encounters are less frequent. And then obstacles and hazards, secrets and puzzles. This is often how you make up for some of that empty space. So instead of a monster encounter, a crumbling passage, um, uh, bubbling lava, a mud pit, uh, a rope bridge that is rickety, the bridge of an ancient of the skeleton of an ancient creature that, while impressive in spanning that chasm, looks like it might fall apart at any minute. Um, Perhaps there's an obstacle that needs to be crossed with no obvious way to get across, and so now the players are engaging and having to figure out a way to get across it. Um, if you're going to put that kind of thing in your dungeon, though, in this setting, just like any kind of other dungeon design, um, be willing to accept your players' ideas and work with them, and maybe build in an alternate route, because otherwise, what's the point? Or if your players are cool with the kind of buy-in in a campaign where we went there, we don't have what we need, but we've seen the obstacle, now we're going to prepare. Example off the cuff: forging through an ancient jungle. You go through the ancient jungle, you get to the temple, there's a giant chasm, you don't have a means to get across it, so you pull back out of the temple, you start cutting down trees, you build yourself a bridge. Now, a lot of people might balk at that. Well, I don't want to spend a bunch of time, role playing, doing nothing but construction. But at the same time, you don't have to play that out. You can narrate that, maybe make a few random encounters, because here's another one of those chances to have a an encounter out of nowhere that shocks enemies is because while the party is gathering timber, Stegosaurus because dinosaurs, or you know that tree you chop down has a hive of killer bees in it and they fall down and now you're dealing with that. So there's opportunities there, and you could use a random encounter table like in the few adventures I have written. Few since I came up with this idea for this campaign and started forging through with it, I've written like 7 or 8 adventures already. And in several of them I've got specific random encounter tables that are used to fill in travel time and things like that. Secrets and puzzles are really key in these kind of settings too, because very frequently these ancient treasures, these ancient places are hidden or secreted or secured um, behind um, lore or mechanical puzzles, things like that. Um, if you're going to do those, though, usually if you're being thematically consistent, there is a um, a way to learn that stuff in advance so the players don't go to those places unprepared. Now, if the players don't make any attempt to learn that stuff, well, that's on them. But having it available is often a thing. But it's also possible that there is no origin for that because so often this stuff is just so isolated and unique. Let's see. Only real difference: stamina kill and a moral. Yeah, but so stamina kill is a very video gamey thing because to me in a tabletop RPG, if I'm going to have stamina kill, I've also got to have the players have stamina. The player characters have to have stamina that wears out. Otherwise, the way to always defeat the enemy is to simply just not fight him. So yeah, I mean, having something that's just automatically going to go down on every enemy like that, like stamina, it's not satisfying game wise in a tabletop game. In a video game, it's fine because you're actioning, you're doing your stuff, but I feel like it would perhaps fall a little flat on the tabletop. Let's see. I agree that the mechanic itself can be a good way of doing it, but I feel like you're setting yourself up for your players approaching every fight from the same standpoint at that point because video games are very linear and very tight and compressed in their options, and so it makes sense that you have a very specific way that you can beat the enemies in a video game. But tabletop games have so many other options available to them that having them having those variations and having or should I say having one unified singular way that you can beat all of the big bads is probably going to be a disservice. I could be wrong, but it just seems a little too canned and a little like something that people would take advantage of. Well, there's a wild and savage world. There's no code enforcement. Uh, yeah, I mean, we're talking ruins here, or primitive constructions. Well, and that's not to say that I mean, real world primitive construction is actually much more reliable than fiction gives it credit for. But to keep it thematically in line, a rope bridge is likely going to be a hazard nearly every time you need to cross it because that's just how they are in these stories. Unless it doesn't matter, in which case it's reliable and it works all the time and there's no problem. Um, hey, Jason, welcome. Um, yeah, so puzzles are always kind of a hit and miss in games. They always seem like a great idea. Um, but there's a weird thing. So you can't account for the puzzle solving abilities of your players. And so, and it's not to say that your players are dumb. Puzzles are a skill. And so some people just may not have that skill or have that knack for puzzles, and your players are just going to fall flat. Um, on the other hand, your puzzle that you design could be too damn easy and it was not a puzzle in the first place and it was really pointless. Um, a good way to run puzzles in the game is to make them more of a time sink than uh, an actual functional puzzle. In other words, make the puzzle take time to complete in the game, and usually put against uh, some sort of I don't know, like doom clock. You know, we've got to get this door or this chamber opened uh, because we started a timer and the chamber's filling with sand or water or snakes or whatever. Um, because snakes. And you know, the but puzzles are always so hit and miss. Obstacles and hazards are a good way to go because they present a situation that then the players can create a way. There might be an obvious way to get around a hazard, but the players definitely have more flexibility and leeway in how to get around those. And so I do like hazards and puzzles, or hazards and obstacles rather than puzzles. And puzzles, um, you can gamify them without making them unsatisfying by having them come down to rolls. If you're not going to put lore in the game that the players can use to actually figure out how to solve the puzzle, you can put the puzzle before the players and describe it in a way that comes down to a mechanic that works off of their characters. This may seem a little more gamey and a little bit more playing the sheet, but in this case, it's worth it. I mean, nobody complains when we're playing the sheet when you roll to open a lock to pick locks. So you kind of treat the puzzles like you would say, a bend bars, a lift gates, a pick locks, hear noise kind of thing. But in this case, they're rolling against a stat. However you're using it, roll under, roll over, whatever mechanic you're using for that. And so you make your puzzle have some sort of method to it. Like I said, the time sink is a good way. If they know that they've got to get that puzzle solved before X, then every failed die roll is an issue, um, um, because that's one more turn. Um, if every time they fail a step in a puzzle, something happens, think Goonies, right? When they're at the keyboard, and then every time they hit a wrong key on that keyboard, a piece of the floor drops out from under them. Um, that's a puzzle, and that's a very gameable puzzle because you could have the players rolling their skills or their attributes. If a player has a background, skill, because like in my campaign, for example, I'm going to be using secondary skills. So let's say they have a secondary skill that would give them an advantage. I can give them a +1 or +2 bonus to their die rolls to reflect that. Um, but that way it's gameable and it doesn't rely necessarily on the player to solve it. Um, unless you're going to drop lore, but understand if you're going to put lore in the world, you got to rely on the players remembering it and then using it. And also if you're going to use real puzzles, you then have to worry about, can your players actually solve it, or is it even a puzzle to begin with because it's so easy, you know. Excuse me, let me hydrate my throat here. All right. This is more of a campaign setup question, but I'll answer it here because I'm talking about adventure design. Uh, yes, races and classes for example, in my campaign, races and classes are heavily restricted. I have 0 demi-human races for characters. I'm using race as class because I feel that in a setting like this, the archetypical nature of characters is much more important than having flexibility of race and class combination, especially when there are no races. So the only two exceptions I've made are reskinned demi-human races who actually fall into sort of the human but not human thing, where they're basically biologically they're human, although biology doesn't mean squat, it's fantasy. But they have traits that make them different than other humans in scope of culture. In my game, for example, while there might be barbaric people living outside the conventionally civilized realms, I also included the barbarian class to be a representation of those very far-flung, isolated tribes who really are not even up to the level of, say, the Norse and the Celts and the Gauls and stuff like that. Not that I have those people in my world, but I have analogs to them. Classes should reflect your setting. Initially, when I created my class list, I did limit it to things that reflected the area that it's being played in, which is a region of the world is called Karsuth. If you've heard me mention that name, it's also a world I use for sort of an eldritch realm, but it's too good of a world name to not use. So the world is Karsuth. The area of Karsuth that we're playing in is the Northlands. It is a sort of Northern European um, section, cold, temperate to cold temperate to subarctic sort of environment, where we have Germanic and Gaulish and Celtic type people. We have pre-Celtic um, British Islander kind of people. We have Norse folk, and then we have the Arturians, which are sort of a late Roman, Dark Age European model. Now, there are other parts of the world that exist in Karsuth, but that when I was creating my classes, when I was making my initial class list, it reflected this setting. So I have the barbarian, I have fighters, I have thieves, I have also the berserker. I put the berserker in there. I have the warden from Carcass Crawler. The warden is actually, yeah, the warden from Carcass Crawler. It's a non-magical ranger. I also put in, I mentioned the other Gargantua and the feral halfling, which represent two different sort of human, very divergent human options, but they're still not demi-humans. Um, and then I have the mage that I mentioned, uh, which is the low magic wizard character. I put in the Beastmaster from Carcass Crawler because I feel like the Beastmaster, because of the movie and also just the general themes, is also appropriate for the setting. It is a low magical character who has a very singular, specific magical ability that allows some wonder and some mysticism to the world without actually making him a blasty, firebally, telekinetic monstrosity. But yes, I do restrict races and classes. I feel it's important. But as the world expands and I talk to my players and new options come in and we go to other areas, um, uh, other classes come appropriate. Also, I feel it's important when you're restricting your races classes to think about what they can do. For example, in my setting, I added late the acrobat because the acrobat, if you look at the mechanics for the acrobat, is also a very good stand-in for a sailor or a pirate type character. If you've got a nautical aspect to your world, which I do, the starting city is going to be Lancia, which is the sort of northern capital of Arturia. It is a port city, a trade city, and so having characters who are corsairs, pirates, sailors is an option. Um, but there are certain classes that don't fit. Like I mentioned, an actual magic user, an actual cleric, they're not very fitting as a player character race. As NPCs, I'll definitely put a magic user in there. When somebody comes across something like Thothamon or Thulsa Doom or any of those other people, those guys are much more akin to actual magic users. I mean, they're chucking magic bolts and they're, you know, creating silence and stuff. So, yeah, short answer, yes. But yeah, that's how I kind of approached it. Um, I seem to be dumb enough, but I will fight. Interesting. Uh, yeah, I mean, if you can manage it, that's good. If you can, and this is kind of where also one of the things I was talking about when you're if you're going to have lore in the game, having the players, for example, be able to find the cipher up front and be able to think about it, or find, if the puzzle is something that they accumulate before the moment where it's needed, then it you can allow an actual puzzle to be in play because the players will have time to interact with it. Uh, Throwing a puzzle in their face while that they actually have to solve themselves while the cave is filling with lava, probably not the best idea. That's where you want to have more of a gamey puzzle. Um, yeah, and this is where you have to kind of control the flow as the DM. Let's see. Yeah, it definitely fits the theme, and it does allow for another magic. This is the other thing. Going back to Knick-Knack 95, and welcome, by the way. I don't believe I've actually seen you on here before, and if I have, welcome back. Um, the other thing to consider is when you are pulling out classes. For example, I've removed a lot of the core classes. I don't have rangers. I don't make sure that you are offering replacements to create enough diversity and enough flavor in in your character options for your players to really feel like um, character class character choice makes sense. If I was, for example, to not put in barbarians, berserkers, uh, and wardens and stuff, and just left it at fighter and thief and mage, while that might be thematically appropriate, it's not going to allow for a lot of player options, and so I'm just going to end up with with players feeling like their decisions don't really matter much, and the party is going to be kind of meh. Um, Also, there are some options in like OSE that I used for the fighters. They have a cool uh, fighter trait ability that kind of allows fighters to customize their lineup a little bit. It's not overpowering. It's definitely built with the same balance and consideration that BX is intended to have, but it does allow fighters to be a little bit more unique. Let's see. All right, continuing on. So, secrets and puzzles. Now, treasure. This is a big one. So, if you're and this ties into the core systems. So, treasure is usually infrequent and very specific, and highly valuable. So, you're not going to have a steady flow of treasure for your players. D&D is built on the core conceit that your players are going to continue to accumulate treasure on a regular basis, building up to their ability to, if you're using an XP for treasure, to then level up. And that really doesn't happen as much in stories like Conan and this kind of a setting. If you're throwing lots of treasure at at your characters, it it's not going to feel right because you have fewer monsters out there, so you're not going to have as many monstrous hordes and treasure troves and stuff like that. Usually when they're going after a large treasure, it's very specific, it's dangerous, it's probably guarded by something horrible, it's probably legendary, the treasure itself is probably cursed. um, and you so all of this is something to consider when you're placing treasure and to keep it thematically correct, and that's why I bring it up as a separate section. But this last point here where you've got valuable treasure often dangerous in their own right, cursed, hazardous, tricks, or traps, that is true. um, you know you might find a treasure hoard and you grab a piece of treasure, and suddenly you find that you are turned to gold, you are withered away to nothing, you burst into flame, you just flat out die. The treasure hoard itself comes alive because it's haunted by the spirit of the ancient king that accumulated it. So yes, and these treasures are going to be infrequent. You're going to be nickel and diming your players uh, throughout the campaign. So that rolls into experience and how to counter the rarity of monsters and treasure. This is the other thing. Monsters are not going to show up as frequently, especially the high XP monsters. And so you have to approach this through a couple ways. Um, First of all, accepting slow leveling is not a bad thing. You know, your characters can stay if you're going to play this for a good long time. Your players and their characters can stay at the same levels for longer periods of time until they actually just organically accumulate the XP that they need throughout the play, um, and that can be fine. Um, a BX style game doesn't have a huge spread of levels, so making those fewer levels spread out even more um, is is okay for a lot of players and DMs. If you're not going to do that, to use an alternative XP system that rewards players for the things that they do with their characters. I have borrowed the second edition AD&D XP bonuses for this campaign. I've always done it anyways, like rewarding role playing and good ideas, but having something that the players can see on my primer for my campaign helps them know that there's a mechanic in place to uh, it's you can basically they know that there's something there to back them up. um Sorry, just a second here, looking at a couple of notes. The other thing too is you allow XP for gold piece value of magical treasures. I know, like for example, in BX and OSE, you get XP for treasure, for gold piece treasure, but not for the magic items themselves. Adding in XP for magical items, as they are pretty damn rare anyways, will is a good way to allow your players to accumulate some extra XP. So if you're a BX player or an OSE player, a good place to look at this would be, I know because they don't really list values for the treasures in uh, in BX or OSE, but you can always pull out a AD&D DMG, and it will, especially the first edition one, if you have a copy of it, whether it's an actual copy or you get a hold of the PDF or whatever. They have prices in there, and some of them are pretty lofty, so you might have to come up with a multiplier. But allowing XP for for gold value, for the gold value of treasure, is a way to do it as well. Um, Another option is to trade out the XP for monsters, for the XP that come with monsters for later editions where they don't do XP for treasure, in addition to XP for treasure. Uh, the reason you would do this is because you're still going to have infrequent monsters, and therefore it's not like they're going to be racking up these higher levels of monster XP all the time, but that way the monsters they do run into count for something. I'm not doing this in my current game. I might adopt it later on, but these are some options you can consider as you go along. Um, so that's for XP and treasure. I'm gonna go through and answer a couple of them. Let's see, Marhawkman. Uh, yeah, except for you might be the kind of guy who thinks it's amusing. I guarantee you that 90% of players aren't going to. And um, as DMs, we're not really there to vex our players. We're there to challenge them, not annoy them. Um, let's see. Let's see, and then let's see. Walk in a room, see weird writing. Yeah, I mean, this is done in some classic D&D adventures. So often you'll have sort of a foreshadowing in the adventure that they then will figure out as they go on. Frescoes, paintings, images, carvings in the walls, things like that. Let's see. Oh, there you go. Cool. Well, thank you. Let's see. Let's see. Looking at. Well, I mean, you're not wrong. I mean, there are some stories that play out almost like this. Like, you're just cursed for even being there. Uh, let's see. Yeah. Dirty history and hobbies and you'll geek complaining about battery life. Nerds, nerd, welcome. All right, final thoughts. So, death and dying. Um, Brutal fights end quickly, tend to capitalize on heroes not dying. Um, so, old school gaming is often typified by character death. And while that is true of the mechanics of the game system, this genre does not necessarily use that. Now, you could argue that books usually protect and plot armor their characters, um, but a lot of the stories for in Sword and Sorcery, especially Conan, hinge on the character not dying. In other words, it's part of the plot. It's a feature, not a bug. So taking prisoners, your enemies are not stupid. They're often going to see a chance to profit from the capture of capable characters, slavery, sacrifices, things like that. Um, those are a thing. Left for Dead. I don't know how many times I've seen Conan left for dead, and then he ends up, you know, coming back. Um, and so that's a certainly thing. That players that enemies will do. They'll assume the character goes down, he'll be dead, and then they'll leave. Um, Another one is that life at a cost. Dark power. Mentioned frequently. There are dark powers at play in the game, and so you know they might have an interest in keeping the hero alive, and they're happy to trade life for for service. I'm not saying don't kill characters, and certainly if they die, then they die. Um, but I feel if you want to keep it thematic, um, then you definitely want to maybe consider not just killing them when they hit 0 hit points. I'm using a system in my game that does not kill you automatically at 0 hit points. You roll on a table. I'm not going to get into tracking -10, down to -10, which would have been my old way of doing this. But the random chart that you will roll on when you go below 0, and every time you take a hit while you're at 0, you're going to roll on this table again. Can result in anything from unconsciousness to injury to maiming. It can still result in death, but it's not a given. This allows the mechanics to allow things like being left for dead, but also just remember your monsters and stuff in this world are maybe not always going to kill the characters. Humans are fodder and have value in these settings. Usually, like I mentioned, slave sacrifices, um, hostages, ransoms, things like that. Um, and savage species often take people for food. You know, y- Players may end up waking up tied to a pole in the middle of a village, looking at a boiling pot in front of them, but that still allows the players an opportunity to role play and escape. Um, that kind of goes into this thing, play to a theme. Um, you know, Not if you don't lean into the theme, it's going to end up feeling like D&D, like any other D&D game. And so, if you're trying to develop adventures and a campaign that have a very distinct savage sword and sorcery kind of a feel, you're doing yourself a disservice if you don't lean into those themes. You got to have player buy-in. That's crucial. Your players have to be willing to play along. They have to be willing to accept capture, and things like that, where the story continues. But you know, um, they also have to accept the fact that their character could die, because Savage Sword and Sorcery is full of deadly fights. And always, as a DM, have a mind for the feel of the game. Rule of cool is definitely king in this. If it seems cool, do it. If not, pass on. And when in doubt, there's a snake. There's always a snake. There are so many snakes in Conan. Even when set is not involved, there are snakes. Open a box, snake. Go to bed, snake. Sit down for a bowl of soup, snake. There are just snakes everywhere. So when in doubt, there's a snake. And there's actually a serious meaning behind that. And really, if you're ever in doubt for how to fill a gap in this kind of a game, throw in a fight. It's not out of theme. You can role play it as some sort of a build up or not. If they're out in the wild and your game seems to be grinding a lot, wolves, bears, a Pictish war party, um, a giant eagle, whatever. Throw a fight at them. If they're in a city, thieves, city watch, cultists, something to that effect. If they're on the high seas, sea serpent, giant octopus, whatever. You know, if they're traveling near the coast, suddenly war canoes come out and the local tribals are after them. When in doubt, there's a snake. So, just throw something at your party. Yes. Well, that's true. And that's what I was saying. I mean, the mechanics of the game are, if you're, I guess I should back up to that point. If you're going to try and run a game where death is not the only result of 0 hit points, make sure that there is still a mechanic in place that determines the fate of the characters. This way, they're not immediately necessarily dead, but at the same time, it's not you as the DM who's determining their fate. The world is still, and the game are still determining their fate. It could be either. I mean, there's literally one Conan story where he goes into a city and there's just a giant ass snake roaming the streets that is allowed to eat people because it's the sacred child of Set, and the city just accepts that. And when he ends up not accepting that the snakes can eat him and kills the thing, the city starts freaking out and calling him a heretic and goes after him for blood. This is from an actual Conan novel. There's a giant ass snake just slithering around town, eating people with full impunity and religious, authorization. So yeah, there is a snake. And that's like the first thing he runs into when he goes into this town. He's like, "Oh, I'm welcome. I'm in this new city in Scythia. Oh, look, a giant ass snake that wants to eat me. I'm gonna kill it. Yay!" I mean, that's in a book. Let's see. Cold death ropes. Yep, snakes, and apes. I should have wrote that. There's an ape. There's nowhere in the world of Conan that there is not an ape. Just like there are snakes everywhere, there's nowhere in Conan where there is not an ape. You could be in the jungles, apes. You could be in the snow, apes. You could be in the city, somebody's pet ape is going to get away. Or if you're in some noble's house, guess what? He has a pet ape or an ape bodyguard. Or maybe that ape is the lord of the house And surprise, he's an intelligent ape of an ancient species who just happens to have a way to look human. But there's an ape. There's always an ape. There's always a snake. Let's see. Uh, let's see. Open the pudding. Open the snake. Pudding. The pudding is made of snakes. Yes. And I mean, there is one comic where they open up a small jewelry box about this big and a snake jumps out of it. So, snakes. Um, let's see. Yes. This is the thing too is so many of the fantastical monsters in the world are going to be variations on a real thing. A boalisk is a great way to throw in another snake and have it not just be a snake. The thing in the bowl, I think, features a snake with a head at the end of it that has the hair of a snake. It's not a Medusa, but it's a snake thing. There are all sorts of snake things. I just got done reading another comic where they run into this like snake that then has like a human torso with a snake head and arms, and then like little vestigial limbs around its midsection. But snake, there's a snake. You know, the Catoblepus is a good example. Catoblepus, for all intents and purposes, looks like it could be a prehistoric creature. It's got weird tusks and a little club tail and stuff. It will not look out of place in a Conan setting. Mammoths, saber-toothed tigers, those are all things that fit very well into the setting. Dire wolves as opposed to regular wolves, huge boars, entelodonts. If you wanted to put in hell pigs, those are a thing. Woolly rhinoceri. There's all sorts of things you could throw in. Um, you know, and when you're in the killer plants. That's another thing. Killer plants are pretty damn frequent. I just read couple of stories recently where there's a tribe of Amazons in one of the African analogs in Conan's world where they have a courtyard that has a bunch of killer plants in it that they sacrifice people to. And then there was a really cool story where this sultan has like a Jabba the Hutt style trap door in his chambers that drops people into the moat of his castle. And there's this like strangly plant in there. And then the storyline goes that uh, the plant was found in the desert, withered and died, and it was brought home and cared for, and grew and grew. And suddenly they started to figure out that it was a little dangerous because it was starting to like kill pets and everything. But then it was left unattended near a water source, and the more water it got, the bigger it got. And so it kills this wazir's daughter, and then he manages to throw it out the window and it falls into the moat, and from there it's just grown, and he thinks he's going to get in trouble, but the sultan's like, you've given me this great thing, nobody can cross my moat now without getting killed by this horrible killer strangle vine thing that surrounds it. So killer plants are a thing, giant insects, they're all really good things that you could throw into these kind of adventures. And humans come in all shapes and forms, but also uh, degenerate peoples are a thing. Ghouls seem to be pretty frequent, although they're not treated as undead. They're more like the Lovecraftian ghoul, where they're sort of a uh, horrible monstrosity that lives in the shadows. And so those have shown up in the games. Um, or in the stories in lost cities and also underpopulated cities, so they're certainly out there. There's plenty of monsters. The key thing is not to overuse them. Don't be afraid as a DM to have people be the monsters most of the time, but also as a player, if you're going to play in a setting like this, do understand that the nature of the game is that the world has a certain flavor to it, and you're not going to be running into kobolds and stuff all the time. You're just not. I mean, The nice thing is that when you're making adventures for this setting, you have tons of monsters out there. Even if we just stick to the OSR monsters, the old school style monsters, before we get into like massive splat books and stuff like that for later editions, there's still so many. Um, and they can reskin really easy. For example, I have in one of my adventures, there is a sort of subhuman group, and I just used orc stats. The orc stats are there, so I could just cut and paste the orc and put them in. Something like an Umber Hulk would be a great monster to have as either the summoned beast of a wizard that he's got locked away, or he summons against the party at the last minute. It would be a good singular sort of monster that is maybe the guardian of, say, like an insect god's temple, but it's a number hulk. The Catoblepas was mentioned earlier. That's a great one. You're traveling through the swamps of blah blah blah, but there's this menace there that's going to get in the way of you, potentially in the way of you getting to where you need to go. um the Yeah, I mean, just going all the way back to the very beginning, when we are talking about monsters, they're used with purpose to tell the story or to shock and amaze, but used with purpose. Very rarely is a monster there just to be another thing to kill. If you need just another thing to kill, men, wolves, snakes, apes, things like that. Um, Although the apes tend to be more in the shock and amaze value angle, because usually they're like, oh my god, what are these savage apes? Except for the one story where there was a dude who was an ancient king who went, sorry, my leg was just itching to high heaven. um I got a space heater down by my legs because it's cold in my basement, but it dries my skin out something fierce. um but yeah, so I mean, you want to be very purposeful with your monsters and your other fantasy elements. So that's, I mean, the big signature thing here is any of your fantastic elements are best used when they're story based. Another note on magical treasures: don't be afraid to give the party magical items, or at least special treasures that perhaps have mechanical bonuses and benefits but aren't necessarily magic. For example, in my campaign, um, recently I wrote up an item in an adventure that is a Hephaestion sword. So in my setting, instead of Atlantis, we have the Hephaestans, who are this ancient race who forged the world. That's the Hephaestion term. Um, and so their ancient metals are much better than any modern steel. And so a Hephaestion sword uh, counts as a +1 sword. It's not magical. It doesn't count as anything special. Actually, it does count as being magical, because it is forged in magic, the ancient magic. So if you're fighting a creature that requires non-mundane weapons to hit, it will count. But those aren't going to be lying around. So when the character finds this weapon, it should be it's a big deal. Um, Now, it's not to say they're never going to encounter more than one of these items in the time of in the adventures. But the other thing to consider is that in the world they're in, these items are often going to have a monetary value that is going to make it tempting to try and sell them as opposed to keeping them. That Hephaestion sword may be a +1 bonus to you, but it could be worth 10,000 gold or 5,000 gold or a king's ransom, whatever, in the game world, because it's rare. Um, you know, um, the other thing to remember is there's often a lot of use of magical or paramagical uh, plants and materials, substances. Conan is famous for the various lotus types. Black lotus is narcotic, but also aids in spell casting. Purple lotus is a thing. but it impedes the mind and causes paralysis. White lotus, I believe, cures wounds. Gold lotus, I believe, cures madness, or maybe it's the other way around. Gray lotus actually causes madness. In fact, there's a really cool story. I think it's Thieves in the House, Rogues in the House, I believe it is, where a group of men are trapped in a room where the smoke of a gray lotus is burned, and they all go mad and end up killing each other. Uh, so these sorts of things are also frequent in there. The blood of such and such, which is maybe like found in a pool somewhere, or conjure, or you know bubbling in a pot known only to tribe X. You know, these sorts of things also play into there, so you can still have fantastic elements. You can still have sources of the players getting special abilities. For example, if a wizard in the game is able to get a hold of, say, some Black Lotus, that wizard will maybe be able to. Your mage character might be able to cast better magic, or might actually be able to cast a real spell, or whatever else you're using in your game. They should be harder to. They should be hard to find. They should be dangerous to use. The other thing is too is like usually you want to have some sort of drawback to their use. I made one recently uh, that imbues the user with temporary hit points. It's a fun mechanic that I borrowed from 5e that's useful. Um, Temporary hit points, but after using it, they're exhausted for 1d4 hours because it just wears them out. And also, taking more than one dose of it at a time is poisonous. Um, and so you can add in these things that allow the players to have fun in a way that potions and the like would allow them to do. But you got to keep in mind that thematic element where any of this stuff is probably not particularly common, but is also dangerous to use. um, Hey Bear, I'm sorry I didn't catch you when you came in, and Coco B, welcome guys. Those two folks are part of my campaign, along with Jason here. So yeah, let's see, and let's see, tentacle beasts are a thing. They're all over. And Odiug would be a great monster for one of these adventures. Uh, I mean, it's a very, very good Lovecraftian monster, and especially if you use the advanced one or the Neo Odiug that's slightly more intelligent. It's a good way to have like an elder god kind of a thing. Uh, you know, by all means, Jason, I know your character is sort of a treasure hunter, which is a good character to have because it's a thing that would exist in this sort of a world. You don't have to worry about being too specific. I mean, it's definitely an old school game, so I mean, don't put too much in your character up front because your character may not be around too long. And I'm not a killer DM, but that's how the system goes. Let's see. Well, yes, it could be used against you, but more than likely in these kinds of settings, you're gonna sell it, and it's gonna be used in some sort of an empire building thing. Now, for example, in my setting, if you were to sell that sword, it would probably make its way back to one of the Arturian or one of the Vantican leaders to help fight their war, or something to that effect. This is a thing. You could kidnap a king, and that would definitely be a thing. That's looking cool. So yeah, Bear was nice enough to try to do. I wanted to do an intro for the campaign, and he's working on some art. I see that. That's very cool. I'll take a better look at it in a little bit. Grumpy Hill Slan, you're here right at the end. I have to get out of here at 45 after, like I've been saying the last few times, because I do have an appointment that butts right up against the stream. So kidnapping a king would be a thing that players might want to do. Certainly something that happens in the stories. Um, Usually doesn't lend well. Often it's the players being recruited by some party to do the thing. Um, I That's another thing. The reasons for adventuring. I suppose I really should have actually put a point in here of this, but that reminds me. You are very much fully empowered to embrace that old school concept of blurb of text explaining why the party is doing this and sending them there. The way that the sort of fiction that this kind of a campaign is based on leans heavily into very much these cold starts, not cold as in actions, but very much separated adventures. Conan is very likely starting out fresh every book. There's not a lot of continuation from book to book to book. There's little back threads, but for the most part, it's a fresh adventure every time. Now you can role play this out, and you can definitely have your players have this thread, but it's also the sort of setting where you can literally start an adventure, you know, by going, you were recruited, a noble has recruited you to sail to an island to find this lost item, and he wants you to bring it back for him. Or a king, his daughter is missing, and certainly he needs you. Needs you to find him because none of his men have been able to do it. Or you know, it could be different. It could be like crazy priest or evil priest hires some fools to do his dirty work for him, and then they go and they do it, and they get through the dungeon, and they recover the thing only to come out and have that very Raiders of the Lost Ark scene where the priest is out there with his minions, way more than the party can hope to ever fight, steals the treasure from them and walks off laughing into the jungle. um, and that would be very apropos for the theme of the setting. So yeah, I definitely lean into it. All right, we got 4 minutes. Anybody has any final questions in regard to what I've been saying today? Um, lay it on me. I really appreciate the 15 folks that showed up. I think that was the high count. Um, I'm really hyped about this game. This game's going to start on the 22nd. It's going to be run on Mondays. I'm planning on streaming it. Um, it will start at 7 p.m. Central Time. And right now, I think I've got 6 people lined up. Whether or not that holds, we'll see. Um, I can run up to 8, but that would be pushing it. I also kind of want to see. Kind of see this as a living campaign in which it'll continue and go on in this world as long as people are willing to play. So characters might cycle in and out as they die, or players get tired of them, or the character becomes unplayable because he's dead, not dead, but super injured, whatever. Um, yeah, but look for it. It will start on, like I said, the 22nd on Monday, 7 p.m. Central Time. Currently, it's going to be me, Coco B, Bear, uh, Jason from Mechhead Studios, and a couple other guys. I know one guy. I know Coco B only through my meeting them through Bear, and another one of Bear's crew is going to be there. Um, and uh, let's see. Then also a guy from Yogg's crew, Daniel. So I believe he actually poked his head in earlier. I'm not sure, but yeah. Uh, I'm horrible with equating screen names to people names. So if I missed you and you're in my game, it's not that I hate you or I don't care. I just have the memory of a sieve. Um, uh, Jason, I will chat at you later. Um, and with that, folks, I'm going to call it a night or a day. It's still morning. I don't know what the hell I'm talking about. And please like, share, and subscribe. I haven't done that in a while. I have a Discord. If you're not on the Discord, come and join the Discord. A lot of the talk about this campaign and everything I've been chatting about is getting posted there. Um, Comments. I appreciate the comments. I do read them all and I respond to as many of them as I can. If you have questions that maybe I didn't cover or you're coming into this video later and you see something that you like and you want to actually ask questions about, by all means, put it down there. I'll read it. I'll respond to it. And Derek, welcome. Yeah, one of these days, dude. One of these days. I'll get you into a game. We'll get you into a game. We just gotta figure out how to make it happen. But with that, folks, I do have to go. Have a good one, everybody, and as always, get out and game.